So, welcome to the next edition of the Rare Business Podcast. With me today, I have Dana Miller. Hi, Dana.
Hi, Adrian.
So, Dana's the SVP of Client Services of a social analytics firm called Crimson Hexagon. But, Dana, for the benefit of our listeners and readers, can you tell us a little bit about you and a little bit about the work that you do?
Sure, absolutely. So yes, I'm Dana Miller, and I manage the client services organization at Crimson Hexagon. We're a social media analytics software company, and really my team's job is to manage our customers' experience post-sale. And that's really grounded in our ability to help them achieve their desired outcome with our application on a consistent basis.
Okay, cool. Now, when we were talking...
Yeah.
Oh, sorry, do you want to add something?
Well, I was just going to give you a little bit of background, and in terms of sort of how we think about things at Crimson Hexagon in terms of customers.
Please.
I've got a long background in the customer business, and so working with a social media listening tool is a fabulous way to really focus in on those customers and to become very good at that customer management.
Okay. The thing that here on the blog, I'm really interested in. Well, I guess I'm a little bit of a geek when it comes to my interest in service and experience and stuff. And when we were talking before about teeing up this interview, we were talking primarily around, how the voice of the customer typically conjures up sort of images of focus groups and survey forums and call centers, but it's sort of generally a new brand or a new label for what is a lot of just like repackaged old techniques. But you were telling me some really interesting stuff about some brands that are using social listening to enrich and improve their voice of the customer programs. So can you tell me a little bit more about some of the stuff and some of the work that you're doing or some of the brands that you're coming across?
Sure. Absolutely. So I really like the way that our application can holistically help organizations with their voice of the customer programs. And in fact, there's a lot of different things that we can do to help that, and many of our customers do that. So first of all, I think that from a social data perspective, social media data adds so much nuance and makes a voice of the customer program that much more robust because there's some really interesting twists to the ability to use social data. So, as we know, voice of the customer programs can be very sort of steeped in methodologies and structure, generally because they're a huge investment in time and resources. So although you want to structure surveys and focus groups to get the broadest information possible, sometimes it's cost prohibitive to do so or time prohibitive to do so, or you may not always get a chance to ask follow-up questions, etc. So social data is just out there, and it's waiting for you to ask any question you like, as well as any follow-up question as well. So it's really the economy and flexibility of adding that data that's really appealing, I think, to most of our customers. And second of all, social data actually makes it really easy to get a clear picture, not only of your brand and organization, but what your customers are thinking in direct comparison against any and all of your competitors or other organizations that you may want to benchmark yourself against. I always talk about Nordstrom's and Apple and Zappos and Amazon as great customer experience companies that we can compare ourselves to or learn from. And social data analysis actually allows you to do that very easily. You have not only all of the things people are saying about you or your company, but about all these other great companies that we know about. And you can kind of benchmark yourself against that.
Okay. Sorry, I was just going to jump in and say that does that not necessarily require that you need a sort of a big data set, or do you think kind of actually smaller firms can learn from this and not necessarily learn? They might be entering the market, and then there might not necessarily be a huge amount of social data about them, but they could use that by doing the competitive listening and then learn about kind of where the benchmarking, as you kind of alluded to.
Yeah, exactly, and that's what's great about it. If you're a smaller organization and you're looking to find your way, I mean, we all like to mentor ourselves against someone who's been there, done it before, or does a really good job of it. And so you can do that. In addition, I think if you are a large organization that's doing something differently or wanting to do something differently or going into an area that you've not been before, you've got some readily available data to be able to sort of forensically look at how someone else did it. And then even more broadly, what I think is really interesting about the social aspect of understanding, what customers out there or potential customers are thinking is that you don't actually have to make it about you or about your competitor or about another benchmark organization. You can just make it about a topic. You can understand, we generally call this unbranded analysis, and you can actually find out a lot more information just about what people are interested in terms of topics.
Right.
And then you can actually understand profiles of consumers, like millennials. People talk about millennials all the time, and we can understand what do millennials think about in this area or that area. What do moms talk about? Moms have always been a very big target group for organizations, and now increasingly dads are a big target. You'll notice a lot of the marketing in place now is actually speaking more to the dads than to the moms in some cases, and social media allows you to really focus in on those particular affinity groups and get information about them.
And does that kind of lend itself to the building up of, if you like, a richer persona data set rather than a demographic data set?
Yeah, absolutely. And a lot of marketers and a lot of organizations will ask, more frequently about personas. And I've worked with some organizations in the past who've actually gotten their persona down to a very particular person and given it a name and all of the rest of that. But I think a lot of the opportunity there is to really define, who your customer is, what it is about them that's interesting to you as an organization, and then also find other people that are like them who maybe don't know about your organization yet, and allow you to kind of reach out to them based on what you know about their affinities. That's a very interesting and unique use case that we find in social data listening right now.
Okay.
I think one more thing, Adrian, too, is I think when we talk about what's interesting about the use of social data in a voice of the customer scenario is the thing that I like best about it is that it's about incorporating social data into your VOC data set that is about spontaneity and sincerity. So sometimes when you're crafting voice of the customer programs, you have to work particularly hard to make sure that it's not stiff or over-designed and things like that. Social data is just a natural conversation. It's very spontaneous. And the consumers are talking to each other.
Yeah.
And they're not talking directly to you. Voice of the customer programs is all about the customer having a conversation with you as an organization or brand. Social data is about them talking to each other. And so this is that sort of fly on the wall opportunity where you really get to listen in on a natural conversation and the spontaneity and the innovation that happens in that conversation. Mm-hmm. One of the great examples that we have of that with one of our agency customers who's done quite a lot of work with us and with some large brands out there. If you're familiar, I don't know if you're a basketball fan, but a while ago we had a National Basketball Association team here in the U.S. who moved from New Jersey to Brooklyn, New York. And originally they were the New Jersey Nets, and they were moving to Brooklyn to become the Brooklyn Nets. And there was a lot of conversation and a lot of sort of pushback about that. There were the people in New Jersey, obviously, who were, losing their team. But then there were the people of Brooklyn, which was just a pretty straightforward working class town, very, to themselves. And now all of a sudden they were getting this sort of big, splashy basketball team and a lot of celebrities associated with that and a lot of development going into building stadiums and things of that nature. And so there was a lot of conversation about that happening in social media and in the press. And what the team actually did was they spent some time going through all of the conversation on social media, and they listened to what was being said, and there was a lot of noise and a lot of negativity in the conversation. So they really decided to focus on some sort of positive indicators or some positive triggers to help them drown out some of that that noise that was in the conversation. And one thing started to resonate that was completely generated spontaneously by the conversation in social media, and that was around a song, a Jay-Z song called "Hello Brooklyn."
Right.
And over time, that really started to grow. And so what they did was they just listened over a long period of time, trying to figure out how are we going to launch this team in Brooklyn? How are we going to make this a tremendous success? And by listening to the conversation over time, they started to see this resonant phrase, "Hello Brooklyn, hello Brooklyn," and it was in reference, of course, to the team coming, but also in reference to this very popular Jay-Z song that many people knew about. And as a result, what the team and their agency did was they embraced that song and they embraced that phrase, and they decided that the best way to introduce the team was to really embrace this whole concept and build it around the song and build it around the artist Jay-Z, who was also a part owner or part of the ownership team of the team, and really make that the focal point of their campaign. And as a result, they were able to pull out that one positive trigger, that one signal out of social media and turn it into a tremendously successful launch of this team. And, by all standards, it was a very positive experience. The town has embraced the team, and, and now it's just become sort of one of those great stories. But the origination of that was, in fact, that all was pulled out of social media listening. And the whole concept and the creativity around the campaign was, in fact, pulled out of a spontaneous conversation that customers were having or people were having on social media amongst themselves.
Wow, that's very cool. That is very cool. I mean, that's what a great example of just, how you can use that and sort of almost like how you link it with not just with your current customers, but also the kind of, potentially new customers because you're moving to a different sort of area. I mean, do you have another kind of like example kind of that sort of illustrates a different sort of benefit?
Yeah, sure. So this is an interesting one, and it's from one of our agency customers who works with Bugaboo International. I think you know them. They're originally a Dutch company that builds baby strollers, baby carriages.
Okay.
And and they're very sort of the higher end baby carriage has a lot of features and functions and very premium product in the marketplace, and they actually use Crimson Hexagon's affinities application to take a deeper look into who was talking about their brand and what their customers' interests were outside of baby carriages. Mm-hmm. To try to identify other kinds of affinities and other things to see what they could learn. And what they found was that their perception of their U.S. consumer base was reasonably accurate in that they were also talking about and interested in topics like fashion and beauty, compared to the conversations that their competitors' customers were talking about.
Right.
But what they discovered was that what was most important to their U.S. consumer base was actually quite different than what they had thought. The U.S. audience was mostly interested in the functionality of the strollers and not necessarily the high-end allure alone. So they weren't buying it, because it just had a premium brand and it had that name. It was partly that, but it was also, there was some very strong functionality that the strollers delivered that they really were picking out as the most important aspect of their purchase.
Oh, okay.
So that social data was actually validated by a lot of their offline indicators like sales data and interviews, voice of the customer kinds of strategies. So what was actually really a breakthrough in this case was that the insights that they derived from looking at these social media affinities, what their customers online also were interested in and what they found was important, they brought that to the executive team at Bugaboo so that they could actually refine their U.S. strategy moving forward. Instead of just assuming that their audience was particularly interested in these things, they decided that they needed to refine their strategy a little bit to focus in on what their U.S. consumer was saying was really of interest and of importance to them in social media. So from that perspective, it was a great use of social media data to drive strategy. But what was really interesting is that for a lot of organizations, they're just getting to that point now where they're really reassessing the credibility and the importance of social data in and of itself, and having that validated against some of their more traditional data sets has been a really great win and has actually put social data in a sort of a prominent position within organizations, at the C-level and as they drive corporate strategy.
Excellent. Do you think there's a possibility that some of that social data gathering, assuming that the volumes are there, is could possibly displace some of the more traditional techniques?
Yeah, that's a good question, and I think we talk about that sort of a lot. I think that there are advantages, the cost advantage potentially that I mentioned. I think that there are the advantages of the spontaneity, and then there's the advantage of it, just being readily available and being able to ask a number of questions. So I think that we really believe that it is becoming far more than just the ability to count or to measure the simple things. Social media isn't, how well did my social media campaign go is certainly of interest, but I think the ability to count likes and retweets and posts and things like that, even though they are being used to drive ROI and to drive certain, marketing budgets for social media, I think we look at it as becoming a much more strategic data set. And the advantages are really that it's available and it's flexible, and there isn't any kind of question that you can't answer really if you position it the correct way, and you can get a good breadth of information, or you can get as specific as you want.
Okay. I mean, let's take this slightly a slight tangent kind of now, because when we were talking before, you also kind of said, and this is I guess is an application. You talked about listening, and this is an application that you use in your own job, because you were talking about how you personally use listening to help you and your own clients, and we were talking about how this type of listening is not just for a brand who's selling a product or a service, but actually you can also use it as a way of helping you, if you like, add value to your clients. If you are if you're like in yourself, if you're in a client service sort of space, I think we coined the term client service squared. Can you tell me a bit about that?
Sure, and this is an ongoing concept that we continue to iterate on. But the basis of it is that I have a unique ability. I manage customers, and I'm able to kind of understand what their customers are saying about them on an ongoing basis. And so while I might have a customer use our application to listen to what their customers are saying about them, I'm also doing the same. And I'm looking at it sort of the same way they do, but also looking at it as a way to proactively help them understand and interpret what's being said, so that I consult better with them and I can be ahead of the curve. They don't necessarily have to come to me and ask those questions. I can actually go to them and advise them, as in real time as they're experiencing, those things that are happening in social media about them. So we do that. The other aspect of it is that I am sometimes able to get a real sense of the direction of my customers, how well they're faring, or, bumps in the road that they may be hitting. And, I can look at that very selfishly and say that may impact their relationship with me. But I look at it as an opportunity to help them, think about things differently. If I'm also monitoring the conversation about them, then I can understand better if they are a risky customer from my standpoint, or if they are a healthy customer from my standpoint. and I can actually try to, move the needle and make them, less of a risky customer and more of a healthy customer by consulting and advising with them on how to interpret what we are hearing about them in social media.
Okay.
So it's a little bit of a tricky concept, and we are actually looking at ways to sort of automate some of those results to be able to, give us health scores around our customers on an ongoing basis. And we refine that process. It's not necessarily an easy one, but it does make a difference. And we know that when we talk about our customers and the health of our customer base, a lot of it has to do with what people are saying about them in social media. And we take that very much into consideration when we think about, how we interact with them on a daily basis.
Sure. No, it sounds like there's probably a really big application within sort of, potentially B2B sales, sort of client service, those type of roles, because that's just a real potentially value add sort of service. Now, if we go back to sort of listening, just as a broad sort of generic sort of term, I mean, who does most of the listening in companies that you deal with?
Sure. So there's a broad mix. And traditionally, we've done very well talking to marketers. They're always interested in looking at this from a pure marketing standpoint. I have a social media marketing team, and they're running campaigns, and they want to know how well those campaigns are doing. So we do a lot of work with digital marketers and functions like that.
Uh-huh.
Increasingly, our best place has traditionally been with market researchers. And that's not just marketing research, but all kinds of market research firms and consulting firms around the world are very interested in this kind of data and understanding conversations about all kinds of things. We do a lot of work with consumer insights kinds of groups. People want to understand, big, large CPG organizations want to understand what product to build next, how to launch that product in the marketplace. They do a lot of work with us. They do a lot of listening. The other one, I think, as we start to grow is actually moving that whole idea out of a marketing-specific organization and more into a customer engagement or a customer care kind of a position,
Sure.
But all the way up to the executive to help understand sort of strategic business decisions about the company. How do they transform the way they do their business? How do they center themselves around their customer? And there's a lot of organizations that talk about customer centricity and customer experience who have this kind of social listening embedded in their sort of command center for customer engagement, voice of the customer, and overall customer centricity. And I think that's what I find most exciting about what we can do is that those really hard problems, those really hard questions, those things that don't translate into an easy ROI but are very strategic, that's the direction that we're moving in and the kinds of questions that we like to work on and the things we like to answer. So how can social media actually transform, and social media data really transform the way that you do your business, how you think about your customers and how you think about the way that you interact with them.
Okay. And does that, I mean, the people that do that listening, whoever they are, I mean, I think one of the things that hinders many organizations kind of now, and it's been much talked about, is how they still operate in silos and there's kind of walls between sort of functions and things. I mean, but does the data get shared across the organization? And if so, I mean, how do they do that effectively? Is that just by trying to break down the silos, or is it just like sharing screens and giving different departments access to it so they can use it for their own ends? Or how does that work in your experience?
Yeah, sure. So there's a number of different ways, and our goal as a software organization who provides these kinds of insights is to make it easier and easier to consume, not just by people who actually actually use our application to, ask the questions and to interpret the data, but for everyone else in the organization to be able to consume these kinds of insights. So we continue to work to make that easier, but historically, our customers are really good at being able to share the data internally. Many of them have either used our API functionality to drive data right into a global dashboard or into a command center dashboard that is projected throughout their organization or on their internal website. Many of them use their internal corporate tools to circulate analyses that we have provided or they have created using our application. And what's really great about that is that I have seen in the past where, the people that, the particular group that we work with will create an analysis, for example, and they will circulate that throughout their organization. And it's actually, there have been times when the information goes viral. It's so interesting, it's so insightful that everyone shares it internally in the organization using their own sort of social tools. And it often comes back to our main point of contact, the person who had actually created the data analysis, and people don't even realize sort of where it came from, but they're also amazed that they just keep sharing it around the organization and looking at it. So we've been very fortunate that way, and I think that this kind of analysis and these kinds of insights lend themselves to just being generally interesting, yep. And that really helps fuel that internally. So there's a number of different ways that they do share it, and that really helps us to sort of raise our profile within our customers' organization, and raises the bar for us in terms of the kinds of functionality and the kinds of analyses and insights that we can provide and the ease in which we can provide them.
Excellent. That's fascinating. I mean, just thinking about sort of in the interest of time, and I know you're a busy lady and all of that, and also thinking about our readers and listeners, and if I was to say to you, do you have any sort of top tips for people that are thinking about adding sort of social data into their voice of the customer programs? I mean, what would you say to them, and where would you, what would you say to them where to start and things?
Sure, I think that the really interesting thing about that, and certainly how to think about it, is not to focus on social media listening as just a way of counting things. It's just a way of understanding, how much more, how many more posts or how many more likes, and to not sort of box it into that kind of a profile, but to really think about, what do you want to know about your customer that you don't know? Or what do you want to validate about them? What are the kinds of conversations they're having when they're not talking about you?
Right.
And who are they, and who are their friends, and who is their network? Who is their tribe? Who are the people they trust? Who are the people that truly influence them? And those kinds of questions, if that's what you want to know, if you really want to be creative and innovative and get to that point that we all strive for, which is to delight our customers by giving them something that they didn't actually know that they wanted or needed, but are delighted to find that you thought of that ahead of time. If that's what you want to do, this is a great way to start. To just start asking questions of social media, just find out what people are actually talking about amongst themselves, in the sort of privacy of social media. And I think you'll find that it's not only enlightening, but it can be somewhat overwhelming in opportunity of ways that you can think of to better the experience of your customer, regardless of the size of your organization or, whether you're a B2B or a B2C. There's just so much very interesting information out there and available that you can embrace.
Excellent. Actually, but something just occurred to me as well, is that the interesting thing that I always find is that I always hear about some firms that go and say, well, we've tried that and we've tried the asking questions and things, and yet we've had a very, very limited response. And I think, wouldn't you agree, is that actually sometimes then you delve into that and then you say, well, we asked it on our Twitter account, and we tried to do it on Facebook and everything else. But I guess the key question is that where your customers are hanging out? And if not, why are you not asking in places that they're hanging out? And it doesn't necessarily have to be on your channel. Would you agree with that?
Right. Absolutely. In fact, most of the really interesting information is sort of quote unquote not on your channel, and we really recommend going far beyond the conversation that you are directing or influencing, and looking at what's happening in other conversations that may be sort of adjacent or or tangentially attached to your organization. And that's where you can get maybe more volume of conversation. Lots of organizations will realize that their customers don't talk about them all day, every day. And so they talk about a lot of other things, but understanding that conversation is actually, as important, if not more important, to you as you try to proactively create a customer experience that sort of sets you apart.
Excellent. So Dana, that brings me to my final question, and this is one I always ask, and that is this: is there anything that you would like to shamelessly plug?
Well, I feel like I've probably referenced our application in the way that we look at the world quite a lot through the conversation today. But I think that the thing that I'm most interested in as it pertains to social data is just taking it up a notch and really advocating for brands and organizations out there that when you're trying to create this really great experience, and we're all chasing those organizations who seem to do such a great job of it effortlessly, that you should really aim high, and you should really look at all of those things and all of those data points that are available to you, in the social data set and in other data sets to really help you define who you are and who you want to be and how you want your customers to perceive you. So I would hope that, we have a really fantastic solution to help you get there. And I feel very passionately that the work we do is uniquely designed, and our application is uniquely designed to get you there quickly and to help you be creative and innovative in creating that customer experience. So in the end, I suppose that's just a shameless plug for our own application, but my more general shameless plug is really about creating that wonderful customer experience and to making sure that you're passionate about the success of your customer. And I'm one of those believers that we are definitively in the era of the customer, and I'm really excited about that.
Fantastic. I must kind of clarify, you did say a believer and not a belieber, I think.
That is correct. I did say believer, most definitely, yes.
Excellent. Dana, thank you so much for sharing your experience and your insight with us today. That's been great. I'll make sure I get all that linked up, edited, and so on and so forth, and get it pushed out. And yeah, we'll just kind of hopefully try and create some favorable noise around sort of social data listening and a more enhanced sort of voice of the customer program. And so thanks very much.
Well, thank you, Adrian. That was great.